and it will be an option for going up on the website. I'm going to record next week as well, and then do whichever one is better. Although they're both going to be amazing, so don't worry about that. Most of the people who are at this meeting have gone through training before and filled out the ARIS before. So because we have an important set of new questions, I'm going to stop. I'm going to start at the new questions and then go back to the beginning and go through the ARIS that way. So for those of you who, have other obligations, you can. Oh, yeah, we do have. Hi, Marita. I used to work at Linfield. We do have some new people on the call. Many of you know we had 30% new directors last year. So we're going to do some drop-in sessions as we get after the form opens this weekend. So if you have questions afterwards, you can come in. And I just saw Sharon's name. Hi, Sharon. I've talked to you in a while. All right, I'm going to share my screen. On the call today, we have Wei Jianji and Mary Rose Quinn from MBLC, and they are going to stop me anytime they need to correct me, which is often and okay, or if I've forgotten to mention something that is important. The training does usually take the full 2 hours. Normal Zoom etiquette. Feel free to ask questions in the chat. When I'm going through training, I will pause at certain points and answer those for everyone. And you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions during those breaks. We're trying to cover everything to make it so that there aren't that many questions. But there always are, so feel free to ask them. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and get started since it is 10:06. Starting from the MBLC website, I just want to get you to where you can log into the collect system, which is the Baker and Taylor system we use to gather the stats. On our homepage is the Massachusetts Library Organization Stand with Librarians Against Censorship and Tolerance. This is a joint statement from MBLC, MLA, the MLS, and the MSLA, the School Library Association. Hopefully you've read this already. This came out last month. We acknowledge and recognize how much more frequent and angry the complaints against library programming and services and materials are. And we are going to start quantifying that by taking stats in the ARIS. So make sure you read that and send it to whomever you'd like to send it to. And we're all very sorry that this is happening. To get to the form, if you go to programs and support from our website, and state aid and ARIS is our little home on the web. And then over on the right-hand side is the sort of the navigation for our website, our part of the website. So we've got the homepage, regulations and standards. We'll go over these in a little bit. Policies are just the official wording of the documents from the Board of Commissioners. Awards is where you can find a list of all of your state aid awards and some past awards. I'll show that in a bit. Forms for this calendar with due dates. And the ARIS and financial report is where we're going to go to log in and get started with the new questions this year. So here's the login for Collect. This is a recording of ARIS back when Liz did it 2 years ago. This is what we will be replacing with today's or next week's workshop. So if there's someone on staff who needs to take a look, or there was a part you wanted to double check on, you can go ahead and click on that. a waiver webinar. If your library can't meet their municipal appropriation requirement, there are a special process you need to go through. State aid webinar, so that's the financial report and application. And that will be updated as well this summer, but it is from 2 years ago. Overview of Collect, that's a presentation from Baker and Taylor. And then we get to the ARIS general instructions and tips. So this is the document I sent you the other day that has some screenshots in it, some information about what you should do before you submit. Basically, that's just a sheet that we've developed to help you fill out the form. And then the detailed definitions are is that 26-page long document that gives a definition for each of the question. And I'll show you that when we get into the training in a little bit. These have been updated. So this is the most up-to-date information you will need. So again, if you lose it or you can't find my email, it is on the website. You can also get this from within the Collect system, and I'll show you in a second. And I do a lot of talking. So I'm going to take a sip of water. Then the rest of this page is financial form information, some resources you can use to help you count your resources, and due dates, links back to our calendar, but I'll show that later. So we're going to go into the Collect, log into Collect. And, you know, this should be familiar to most of you. Collect Connect is the system. Baker and Taylor, we pay them to collect the statistics, and then we use it for our purposes. And I submit statistics up to the federal government. So it's a complicated back-end system, and this helps with that. You should have received your login ID and password from WAICHI last week. So check your email. And if for some reason you didn't get that, you can reach out to us. There's one login for your library. It's library based. It's not attached to a person. So let's see. I'm going to go into Abington's system today because they are first in the list. So you're going to just log in. Whoop. Did something wrong. Try it again. So maybe this. All right, I'm just going to use mine. So this is going to look a little bit different than what yours is. But hopefully it will work out just fine. So when you log in, you want to make sure that you're in the correct library and you're in the correct survey, because there is a time in August where both the financial form and the ARIS will be open. So just make sure that you know which one you're in, but it will be up at the top here. We can go back to the survey list. Let me just, I'm gonna go back. Sorry, hang on one second. Okay, I'm gonna actually go back because I think it's important that we see it from the viewer side. So again, MBLC website, ARIS and financial report, log in to connect, and I'm going to try this again. Oops. Nope.
Jen, this is WAICHI. I just tried. It should work.
No, I'm typing in the wrong one.
Oh, okay.
Too many passwords. Okay, so this is what I want you to see. Sorry about that. So when you get in here, you'll see your current surveys, and up here, you've got your ARIS report. And then in August, it will also show the financial report here. So just make sure you're clicking into the right page. And then underneath that, at any time during the year, you can go in and see the past reports that are in the Collect system. So we started using it back, 5 years or so ago. And so you can get your past ones. You can't edit, but you can print it out and get a copy of the ones you've done before. So that's pretty handy. I'm going to go into the ARIS and you hit continue. It doesn't ever say start, which is a little weird, but that's fine. So back up here again, you've got this. Up here at the top, the survey list will bring us back to the page we were just at. So if you ever get lost or you've gone away, been pulled away for a meeting or whatever, this can bring you back to that front page. FAQs is a list of FAQs about the form. How do you fill out a field or whatever? Not particularly useful for you all, but this instructions tab is what I just showed you and sent you. These are the definitions. So it's this really long document, but it is in the system for you. So if you need to go and search for something, let's say we were looking at a question the other day, you can go in and search and it will find that for you. And then this information is also pulled into the survey, and I'll show you where that is as well. You can do a printable version of the instructions. So again, was in your email, it's on the website, and it's in here. And then you can also do a printable version of the survey. And this is also what I sent you the other day. It doesn't look like, it's not screenshots, but it is a list of the questions and room for answers. So this is handy if you want to actually hand this out, physically hand it out to people, your children's librarian for programming questions or whatever. Then I'm going to return to my survey. And over here on the left-hand side is the navigation bar, and each page will tell you, you're in the general information section, you have your staffing, holdings, circulation. If it has part 1, 2, 3, that means there's a lot of information in that. And you can just select whichever one you want over here on the side. And it does highlight in blue, a lighter blue, when you are on that page. Information in white up here, sort of in between each section, is important to look at because there might be some tips for you. Up here at the top, you can show your status. I'm not going to do that right now, but I'll show it again to you at the end. You can print your survey. You can do this anytime you need information. You can print your entire survey or just a section. You can include annotations, which are the notes that you leave for us and for yourself. And you can include data from this year, last year, or no data. And then you can do annotation reports. So if you only want to have a copy of your local notes that you print out and leave in a file for the next director or something like that, you can do that from here. I'm going to return to my survey. Submit is lock. So when you are done with your survey, you want to do show status, and then you want to, when you're all clear here, after you print out the signature page, you're going to submit. That does lock your survey, and we can easily unlock it for you, but we aren't always available right away. So if, say, you lock it and you need something and it's a Friday afternoon, we won't be able to help you until Monday. So just be aware of that. Next navigates to the next page, and then save. I recommend saving if you've done a lot of data entry on the page. It does save when you hit next page, but given last year's problems with the system, I would recommend just saving as you go as well. So I'm going to go down to the new questions this year. And when I hit it, it lights up, and then we get up here. So new questions this year, intellectual freedom questions. And some version of these will be permanent questions. So next year they'll have their own tab, but we may tweak some of them, and we are not asking everything possible for every possible scenario. So I just want to explain that from the get-go. These questions, with the exception of a couple at the end, are asking for information about formal challenges. So this is not, the angry emails or, the Facebook posts. This is when somebody is, going through a process to have books removed, programs stopped, or services ended. So just be aware of that as we go through. And we worked with the various groups and librarians and the ALA's questions to develop these questions. And we care very much about the information. There has not been one space where this data has been collected. And since we already collect data every year from libraries, we decided that this would be a good format to do so. And our communications team gets a lot of questions from people about the status of intellectual freedom challenges in Massachusetts, and this will help them. And hopefully the information will be useful to you all in your work. So the first question, did the library experience a formal challenge through the library's policy or procedure? So again, this is a formal challenge to any library materials during the reporting period. So this is just a yes or no. If you didn't have any, you would just do no, and that's great. If you did, just do a yes or no. If yes, please indicate the total number of formal challenges received to all library materials. So it may just be one, it could be many, it could be 0. Did the library experience a formal challenge through the library's policy or procedure to any library service? So meeting room policy, any displays, any library service that you provided during the reporting period. And the reporting period is last July through tomorrow. So it would be FY23. If yes, please indicate the total number of formal challenges received to all library services. Then the next question, did the library experience a formal challenge again through the policy or procedure to any library programs during the reporting period? We definitely saw an uptick in this. Whether or not they rose to a formal challenge is, that's something you determine at your library. And then if yes, please indicate the total number of formal challenges received. Then we get into what happened as a result. Did library staff experience threats or harassment as a result of the formal challenge? Yes or no? Was library funding or grants negatively impacted as a result of the formal challenge? Yes or no? So did somebody pull, gift certificates from their summer reading program, or did somebody threaten to affect the library's budget? We've seen that happen this year. Did the library experience other issues as a result of the formal challenge? And then if you said yes or no to that, or yes to that, if you reported other issues, please describe what those issues are. And then we want to know who brought the formal challenge. So was it an individual? Was it an individual acting on behalf of a large group? Was it a group? And then what were the themes of the challenge? Was it because of LGBTQ+ themes, race, political viewpoints, religious viewpoints, sexual references or profanity? And they don't have to balance. So if you only have one challenge, but it was on LGBT and race and sexual references, you can say yes to all of those. And then if we haven't covered that, then were other topics of concern? Yes, and then you can report other topics. A group of us in Noble last year had a challenge to a book because of a problem with a map. And so that wasn't a specific, the objection was to the map and not to the other content. So I would put something different there. Please report the total number of formal challenges where the result was library materials remain and the library program and or services continued. So if you went through your process, you had a committee or whomever, the director made a decision or the trustees, did whatever and backed up the library's decision. Did it stay? Were they removed? And then here's the big question here. Please estimate the number of informal complaints that did not result in a formal challenge during the reporting period. So we understand that most of these issues don't go to the level of formal challenge. So we want to try and capture that number here. And I'm going to flag this and come back to it later, because flagging was always my favorite thing. I think most of you know that I used to be a library director, so I've done this from the director perspective. And so this would be a question where I'd say, you know what, I have no idea what this number is. I'm going to go talk to my children's librarians, my young adult librarians, because they're probably getting a lot of informal complaints. So if you don't keep track of this at your library, I would definitely check in with your people and get your best bet on this. This is where you can count those emails. If you had protesters come up to an event with signs against your, your drag queens or whatever, you can count those as informal complaints. If people are complaining on Facebook, but they don't actually try to end the program, you can count those. So this is really, we know this is going to be a much bigger number than the others. And then next year, we will probably break this down into more categories. So just for the next year, you might want to start thinking about breaking these down into more official categories. We don't know what those questions will be yet. We are going to look at the results of this and see where we might need to make some tweaks. Then the next question is, do you have a collection development policy? You should. It's in the law. Has your policy been updated in the past 3 years? We recommend doing it more frequently than you may have in the past to include new media and also to address some of these issues around programs and displays. And then, do you have a formal process for book media programming challenges? So do you have a request for reconsideration? Sometimes they're attached to the collection development policy, but they aren't always part of that policy. So we want this information.
Jen, I just wanted to add here that this information will be critical as we go forward. We are working with various groups, including the legislature, who is very supportive of libraries and wants to protect the services, programs, and the people who work in libraries. And actually we get many requests for information from the media as well. So the more information we have on this topic, the better we are able to explain it. And we have a very strong policy requirement at Chapter 78, Section 33, and we're working with the legislature to make that even stronger. But the important thing is that it is in statute that you have a policy and it protects you. It includes language about the freedom to read from the American Library Association. So I encourage you all to reread that again, and also to be certain that your policy is as up to date as possible.
And Maura Didi is doing a lot of work around policies, and we know that there's a group of people who don't have a policy, and she's working with them to get them done. So this will help us know when we've reached that full meeting of that requirement. And from my experience with that book that was challenged in multiple libraries, we were really defending our collection development policy more than we were defending that particular title. And so, that's always a part of it, is that, we went through the proper channels. We had positive reviews on this book. And so the problem with the book, it wasn't that particular page was not great, but all of the libraries involved did keep that book because it met our collection requirements. And I'm going to pause and check the messages. All right. No microphone or quote. Okay. Where's the login for our network point person? Yeah, you won't see the surveys are closed right now, Marita, so you won't see anything yet. It doesn't open until Monday. I mean, Saturday. Oh, and wait, you meant that. And at some point, yes, I will go over the notes. Yep. And we also updated the tips sheet to go into more specific detail on that. So it is in those forms as well. Disregard. You're welcome. We will disregard. Excuse me. I've had a lovely summer cold. Are there any questions on these intellectual freedom questions before I go back and start over? All right. So I'm going to go, I'm just going to continue on for the ARIS signature page. So if anyone has to hop off, you can do it. There are some tweaks to some of the questions above, but they're not, we've tried to explain them. So when you are done with your survey, before you submit, you want to print out the signature page that comes with this. And this is a signature page, and it needs to be signed by the library director and your preferably your trustee chair. And the ARIS is due August 18th this year. It's a little earlier than prior years, so just flag that for your records, for your vacation schedule, all of that. If your trustee chair isn't available, you can have another trustee, but this does have to be signed. It is an acknowledgement that you have done this work and that the information you are provided is accurate. And then once you submit and lock your survey, you can't go back and get this without us reopening it. So please make sure you go in order over here. And then the next page is the submission process. And so up here, before you submit your data, make sure you show your status. And I'll show that a little later, but this will show you what you still have to do. And a lot of people didn't fix those things last year. And so, I have to go back to you and have you finish it. And so it would be really good if you can check this and do it yourself. Because if you don't do it, we can't move forward with the process until they're all resolved. So show your status, fix any edit checks, unanswered questions, and flagged questions. And then actually, why don't I just show it right now? I just flagged something. So edit checks here, when you show your status, it's got a screen for edit checks, a screen for unanswered questions, and a screen for flagged questions. So flagged questions are the questions you're going to go back to because you need to ask someone else, you need to do more math, you need to, you don't feel like doing it right now and you're just going to save it until the end, whatever those are. So if you resolve this, once you finish this question, you can undo your flag and then save. And then you won't have anything on the screen, and this is what you want. Unanswered questions, I shouldn't have hit that because it's going to take a while to load because we haven't answered any questions yet. So this will, if you accidentally skipped one or something like that. So that will be there. And then edit checks are when we need additional information. And this happens mostly if your answers are different significantly from what you did last year. And during COVID, this was a big one for, say, programming questions, circulation questions. And so for a lot of people, the answer was, we didn't have any programs during COVID. It can also flag for you if you mistype something, so instead of answering 100, you do 1,000 and it says, hey, this is a significant difference from last year. And then there are federal notes. So these are notes that when you type this in, this will go up to the federal government. And then state notes go to MBLC and are based on state questions. Local notes are for you to write notes to yourself. I recommend using this a lot. Anytime you have to ask someone for help figuring out an answer, there's a section where you have to categorize your staff and, putting those in. And the utility of this is that when you go to do this next year, your previous year notes will show up. And so that way, that's kind of like a cheat sheet for you next year. And then if that information is the same, we recommend that you cut and paste your previous year notes and put them in the local notes. They don't go further than 1 year. So, save yourself some time and energy by saying, check with Nicole for this information. Now, in order to know what answer we're looking for and which field you want it in, read the note. So you're going to get a note with your edit check that says, hey, here, this information is wrong. So here it's saying your prior year is greater than 1 and this year it's 0. Is that still the case? And if that's the case, say yes, we don't have any more librarians with the MLS on staff. And then it will say, please check the current year value and provide an explanation for the change. And then it says in a federal note. So that will tell you right there. And you say, changing of staff, no degreed librarians anymore. If you're not sure and you don't want to read it and you're just going through very quickly, you can put the note in both that federal and state, that's fine. But it does tell you where you need it. And this is the part last year where a lot of people didn't bother going in and fixing these. And that creates a log jam for us. And we can't like finish the process until everybody has done this. So if I send you an email sometime in, August or September and saying, hey, you need to go back and fix this. You really do need to go back and fix that. So, because I can't verify your data for you. And then when all 3 of these are done, and we put this in the tip sheet, I don't have it super handy right now. I'll get back to that, Lise. So when you are all done and you get to your show status screen, it will say edit checks with a green check mark. It'll say unanswered questions with a green check mark and flagged questions with a green check mark. And then it will say submit. And that's when you can go ahead and submit. Make sure you save if you've done edit checks or, changed your flag questions. But then once you've gotten the go ahead here, you can go ahead and submit. If you don't do that, you will be getting follow-up, and you're going to get follow-up a month or 2 later, and you don't want to have to go back. So please do this step and make everyone's lives easier. So I'm going to return to my survey, and I saw Lisa's question about that the questions don't save year to year. Yeah, they only save from 1 year prior. So do cut that and paste it if it's the same information. You can print out your notes to yourself from previous years. And so if you are a paper person, you can do that, or you can save them to your computer. But those notes are really very helpful. All right, so next I'm going to go back and walk through the beginning. Let me just check this real quick. Wait, Lisa says wait. Yes. You didn't answer the other question. Oh, this tells us we need it in the federal or state, or if we had an error, but how do we know at the beginning? You won't. You have to answer the question when you fill out the survey. And then that's why you need to go, as you're going through, when you save it, it should pop up as with the red on the side. And then if it doesn't, it will show up when you do this show status. But it's usually pretty good about catching things as you go. So if you want to add notes, I'll show that in a second when we're going through.
Okay, yeah, to clarify, it's like when we're trying to add a note, how do we know? I know local notes, but how do we know to say which one we put notes in for federal or state unless there's the error that came up?
You would only do it if there's an error.
So we wouldn't add notes ever in those areas. It would always be local notes then.
Yep.
That we want to put for ourselves, and only if there's an error. Okay. All right. That clarifies that.
I mean,
Thank
you can put notes in if there's a significant difference.
But they usually ask that.
They usually ask.
Yeah, that's right. Okay.
Yeah. And then when I go through and I process it for the federal level, I may come back to you because sometimes the federal level flags things that the system doesn't flag. And so I need to come back and ask questions. And that happened a lot with programming numbers this year. But if you don't have any edit checks in your system, you're fine. You don't need to leave federal or state notes.
Thanks.
The majority of the questions are going to be at the federal level. The state level questions, there are only a few, and one of them has to do with meeting rooms And the other specifically has to do with the non-resident circulation, because those are questions that we need for the rest of our state aid report, and not necessarily federal questions.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to return to my survey list just to show you again. And so the person from Linfield, I'm sorry, I can't remember your name right now, had said she'd gone here. There aren't going to be any surveys here until Saturday. But so this is what it's going to look like when you log in after Saturday. Please don't log in Saturday. Take Saturday off or take Saturday off from this if you are working Saturday. Okay, so we're back to the front page, and I'm going to just walk through these answers or these questions, and I'm going to show you this toggle here for where you can show and hide last year's answers. For some people, that information is too much. For other people, it's very useful. I find it useful, and I'll show you some examples of why when I'm going through. So if your field is grayed out, that means you can't make changes. And if you do need to make a change, you need to email us and we can make that change for you or open it up to you and send it back. And this is just, because many of these questions don't change from year to year. So your municipality, your town or city, library name, there was a library who changed their name last year. So I need to go in and change that here. And then I need to go and change it up at the federal level as well. Street address, if you moved during the year, we need to update that information. And this might be a place where you're like, oh, we moved, but I'm not going to interrupt my flow right now. I'm going to save this so I can send Jen an email later. Your city, your county, zip code, mailing address, city, zip code, your telephone number, director's phone number if you have a direct line. If you have joined a library network this year or changed, you do need to let us know about that because that is blocked off. We need to know who's completing the survey. It doesn't have to be the director. A lot of assistant directors will fill it out, or if you have an administrative assistant, we need to know who that is. And that will be the person I contact if there's a problem. So just, you might want to let them know. So they might get a random email from me in the fall. The director's name and last name, and it can be the same. It's fine if the director is filling it out. Email address, trustee contact information here. Your population is pre-filled. This comes from the Department of Revenue. We don't change the population. There are some libraries who are impacted by the 2020 census. You're grouped into, population groups. And if you went up a population group, you have 3 years to meet those changed requirements. And I'll go over the requirements at the end after we go through the form. Legal service area boundary change. This doesn't apply in Massachusetts, so you can just do leave that at no. Your reporting period starting date will be July 1st, 2022, and then ends June 30th, 2023. So most of the form is about the entire last year, last fiscal year. There is a question that deals with this coming fiscal year, and I'll explain it when we get there. Number of central libraries, the population is pre-filled. Your group, all this stuff is pre-filled for you. And you go next. So this section is the position, salaries, and staff education levels, part 1. And then over here, you'll see there are 4 parts to this. This is where I think it's really important to leave yourself notes because, people might change positions or you might hire new people and you have to make some decisions about where you put people. And again, this, as I mentioned, most of the survey is for the last year, but this salary information we want for July 1st of 2023, because when the information eventually gets posted, we want it to still be the most current information. So because July 1st is the fiscal year and everyone in Massachusetts is on a fiscal year, we assume that most of the salaries will be as up to date as possible when you hit that new fiscal year. Now, because July 1st is a Saturday, if it doesn't go into effect until July 3rd or July 5th, you can use that date, but use it as the first date where the salaries are in effect for FY24. For the library director, well, for all of the positions, we want the minimum hourly wage and the maximum hourly wage. If you are paid annually, as many directors are, do that math and come down with an hourly wage. So take your annual salary, divide by 52 weeks, and then divide again by whatever your schedule is. So some libraries are contracted to work 35 hours, directors, some are 40, whatever your hours are. And then 52 is the standard for the federal government. How many directors do you have? That really should just be one. How many hours do you work per week? This is contracted hours. We know, we are very familiar with the fact that directors work way more than this, but what are you contracted to? Number of vacancies. There should never be a vacancy for the library director position. You have to have someone in that position. That's part of the certification. That's part of state aid. So if you are in the process of hiring a director, or if you've hired someone and they don't start until mid-July, you have to have somebody who's in charge for those 2 weeks. And so this applies to acting directors and interim people as well. And an interim or acting person has to be appointed at a point where there's no permanent library director. Is the director a volunteer? There are some libraries where the director volunteers and is paid a stipend for their service to their public library. These are some of our smallest libraries in Western Mass for the most part. And you would just answer no if you are not a volunteer, and yes if you are. The amount of the stipend if you get one as a volunteer, how many hours you work as a volunteer. And then we get into the degrees, and what this question is trying to get at is how many librarians in your library have master's degrees in library and information science. So if that's the degree we want. So for the director, your director might have 2 master's degrees. We only want the one that's associated with library and information science. If you're a director in a smaller library and you aren't required to have that MLS, then put whatever the degree is. We only want 1 degree per person in the position. So we don't need to know that your library director has the MLS and a bachelor's degree. The bachelor's degree is implied in that MLS. Do not include education levels for vacant positions. This snapshot of this day in July is based on who's working in these positions at your library. Assistant director, minimum hourly wage, maximum hourly wage, same questions as we go through. How many positions do you have? There are some libraries that have more than 1 assistant director. How many hours do they work? So if you have 2 library directors and they both work 35 hours, 2 ADs and they both work 35 hours, then we want 70 here. How many vacancies? So this would be if one of those positions, it is okay for you to have an empty AD position. And then how many of your positions have masters in library or information science? Versus other graduate degrees. And again, it's matched to a person and should only 1 degree per person. So if you have a library director and they have a doctorate in history, we don't care. I mean, we do, that's lovely, but we need to know about that MLS. Senior librarians. So this is a position where the librarian is in charge of other librarians. So if you have a reference department or a children's department and it's a large department and your head of youth services supervises multiple or supervises other librarians, they count as a senior librarian. These titles come from the Institute of Museum of Library and Information Science Service, and they're designed to distill down the basic positions that are in libraries across the United States and the territories. So there's one of me in every state and territory, and there are, over 9,000 libraries that are included in this survey at the federal level. And so there's no way to do nuance for all of the different positions that everyone has. We can't do that even in Massachusetts. So these titles are the basic, this is what this means. And so you need to fit your people into these categories. So senior librarians would be usually a department head or manager who supervises other professional librarians. Then I did this little arrow here, or a question mark. This maps to that instructions document that I showed you earlier. So it's a list of all of the questions and all of the definitions, and then those are match up with each question. So as you're going, you can check that form if you've printed it out, or you can check it online, or you can just pop up this and see what is written for that. Then for your senior librarians, we want minimum hourly wage and maximum hourly wage, number of positions, total hours per week, again, the total. So if you have 4 positions, 40 hours a week, you want that to be 160 hours. Now for the minimum hourly wage and maximum hourly wage, you want to do the minimum for your lowest paid employee and your maximum for your highest paid employee. So it may not be the same person. A lot of people have been asking about union contracts or salary scales at your town. You can do what is on those in those contracts or on that scale for this question. People use this salary information a lot, and these position information a lot. We get a lot of questions about what the wages are in neighboring libraries. They are often used as tools to argue for more staffing or more increases in salary across the state. We just have several questions like that last week. So, we want to get this right, and we want to share the full range of what people are being paid. Hours per week, number of vacancies, and then your degrees breakdown. So if you have 3 people in these 3 positions and 3 of them have the MLS, you'll do 3 here, but it could be 2 here and 1 here. That's fine. Branch librarian, if you have a branch and you have a librarian who spends at least half of the work week at the branch, they can count as a branch librarian. Wages, minimum and maximum hourly, number of positions, total hours per week, number of vacancies, and then we have the degrees again. So you'll see that for each position that I go through, these questions are the same. So for those of you who are new, if the previous director hasn't left you this information, and hopefully they have, you might want to keep a chart somewhere and just go talk to each of your staff and find out what their highest degree is. For adult services librarian, this is an important one. So this position can be anything across your library where the audience is primarily adults. So if you have a program coordinator and they do mostly adult programmings, or they work with the senior center or whatever, they are an adult services librarian, regardless of what their title is at your library. Reference librarians, pretty standard across the Massachusetts. If you have them, they count as adult services librarian. They might supervise staff. They work mainly with adults. Minimum hourly wage, maximum hourly wage, number of positions, hours per week, number of vacancies, number of degrees for each of those positions for the people. And then next. Now we are on to the children's services librarian. So they may supervise staff, they work mainly with children and young adults if you don't have a dedicated young adult person. If they supervise other librarians, that position would be a senior librarian. But if you have, a children's librarian and 2 assistants, you would put them here. Minimum, maximum hourly wages, number of positions, total hours they work together. And you can see that when Deb goes to do her ARIS, she'll say, oh, last year I put 57. Why is this year's adding up to 82? Did I do the math wrong? So this is, I always found the last year's answers helpful just to kind of check myself. Number of vacancies, number of masters in library and information science, etc. Circulation librarian. So this is a person who is in charge of the circulation and may supervise staff. This is if it is a librarian position at your library. Sometimes a circulation librarian at your library is not a librarian position, so you would put them in a different spot. So these first 2 pages are for librarian positions at your library. Minimum hourly wage, maximum hourly wage, number of positions, total hours per week, number of vacancies, and then the degrees again. Technical services librarian. So this is the person in charge of tech services. It could be acquisitions. It could be whatever you call that person who does. I saw a position posted for the bibliographic services, whatever your title is, if they do technical service, cataloging, and other related duties, you would put them here. They may supervise staff. Minimum, maximum hourly wage, number of positions, hours per week, vacancies, and then degrees again. And then young adult services librarian. So this is, again, a librarian position who may supervise staff. And then this is one where it gets a little bit tricky because a lot of times libraries will split a young adult position between young adults and reference or young adults and children's and whatever. Choose whichever is the intent of the position. So if you are doing a young adult and reference librarian or reference and young adult, and you hired them and you're doing this position because you want to serve young adults, put it here and not in adult services. This is another area where people like to find out how many other libraries have young adult positions. So, you need to make a decision. And then what you could do in this is leave yourself a local note, counted Joe as YA, and then save that. And then I'm gonna delete it because I don't want it to show up on Deb's thing. But and then next year you'll have that note for yourself. Whatever you decide, the important thing is that you are consistent and that it doesn't change from year to year, because that will just make your statistics a mess. So choose and leave yourself a note to remind you. We don't care. The federal government doesn't care. But your colleagues use this information to help advocate for these positions in their own libraries. I would say that's the case for young adult and assistant director. So if you have somebody who's an assistant director and reference, I'd recommend putting them in the assistant director category, because that's where that's another position that people use these statistics to advocate for staffing at their libraries. Number of positions, hours per week, number of vacancies. Then we get to the degrees. Other librarians, this is positions that truly don't fit into those categories. Don't put a program librarian here because that would fit into either adult or children's, whatever their primary mode is. This is for things like a systems librarian, or if you have a web coordinator, that's a librarian position. Volunteer coordinator, you have a museum curator, webmaster development. All of these positions that you have, sometimes mostly in the larger libraries, you might have positions that don't fit into those traditional librarian roles. You can put them here. Minimum and maximum hourly wages, number of positions, hours per week, vacancies. Again, these questions are consistent. And then the degrees. And then we are on to page 3 of the position salaries. And now we are on to the non-librarian positions in your library. So these are the assistants or the technicians or associates or whatever you call them at your library, you need to fit into these titles. So the senior library associates, senior library technicians, more complex circulation, processing, or public service duty. And they have a supervisor, but they may have supervisory responsibilities. So, you know, you may have somebody who is working, they're not a librarian position at your library, but they do supervise people in that department. You could put them here. Minimum hourly wage, maximum number of positions. So here Deb has 6 positions last year. So if she's, you know, hired new people or reclassified people, this might be different this year and she'd want to leave herself a note. The cumulative hours they work, number of vacancies on that particular day in July, how many degrees, or what degrees. Then library technician, circulation, processing, other public service duties under supervision. They don't usually supervise staff. Minimum, maximum, how many positions, total hours added together, number of vacancies, and then their degree. We've been getting a lot of questions about substitutes. Substitutes are not included on this survey. If they don't have a set schedule at the library, they are not considered permanent employees. And this is looking for permanent employees. Administrative assistant, so this would be somebody who works with the director or, you know, full-time job doing, you know, ordering and, you know, helping other people. Secretary, office manager, they have more responsibility than support staff, but not as much responsibility as professional staff. So these are, you know, if you have an executive assistant or something like that. Minimum, maximum, number of positions, total hours per week, number of vacancies. Your page is a person you pay to put books away mostly, doesn't supervise staff. We don't care if they're adults or teenagers, that doesn't matter in this survey. This is only if they're paid employees of the library, not volunteers. Minimum, maximum hourly wage, how many positions, what are their total hours they work, how many vacancies, degrees again here. There is a category here for number of high school students or other. So if you have teens working. Then clerical staff, so this would be like a part-time bookkeeper who comes in to pay bills. This is not your administrative assistant. Could be if you have a trustee's secretary who works, you know, just at the meetings and typing up the minutes, you could put them under here. Minimum, maximum hourly wage, number of positions, hours per week, number of vacancies, same questions. Then other staff. So these are not librarians and other people who don't fit into those categories. So say you have a bookmobile driver or a security guard or some other position that is not at the librarian level. Their minimum and maximum hourly wage, number of positions, hours per week, number of vacancies, and then their degrees. And then the custodian. And there's a note here that we don't need the education level for your custodian. And this is only if the custodian is paid for out of the library's budget. So if you share a position with the DPW or the police department and they're paid from that library, that department's budget, you don't include them here. This is just the people who are paid from the library's budget. Custodian, minimum hourly wage, maximum hourly wage, number of positions, hours per week, and number of vacancies. Then we get to totals. And so the nice thing about the system using this program instead of us doing it on paper like back in the day is that this adds up for you. If you're interested, you can check the math, but it's pre-done. And then at the bottom of this page is staff hours and directors annual survey as of July 1st or July 3rd or July 5th. How many staff do you have who work 35 hours or more per week? So how many full-time staff? How many do you have that work 35 hours, fewer than 35 hours? And then this question is a little tricky, so I'm going to try and explain it as well as possible. Total hours worked per average week by librarian positions. So this is the professional position at your library, including the director, who have the MLS. So if you have a children's librarian who has an education degree and doesn't have the MLS, you don't put them here. If you have somebody with a museum degree who's running your historical society that's in your library, you wouldn't include them here. You also don't include here, and this is something that a lot of people did last year, you don't include any of your library assistants who have the MLS. So this is only the people who are in librarian positions. So if you have a really robust reference department and all of your assistants are retired librarians, that is wonderful and it's a wonderful service. But if they are library assistants, those hours aren't counted in this question. The actual annual salary for the library director. So if you had it broken down, you can put it here, or if you do get paid hourly, then you can do that math and put that here. And then if you did any other librarians or other staff, we want to know their job titles, so you can enter them in these boxes. And then this will do the math for you. And then we'll go to the next page. All right, and so I'm going to stop and take questions. Wait, so we have Bethany. We have a funny situation with wages where there's a new class comp plan, but a few employees have been kept on a legacy plan with different ranges. Should wages reflect which is currently or actually paid, or what a new staff member would earn? Can you mix and match and do the lowest of either the legacy or new and the highest of either the legacy or new? And that way that would probably get the best range. This is another area where it's important for people to see what people are offering in what people are making in Massachusetts. If Mary Rose is still on the call, I may let her chime in that. What if the admins have additional graduate degrees? Does that go to the other? If they have the MLS, put them in MLS and skip the other degree. Never mind, you just answered. Great. What if the supervisors don't hold an MLS? That's fine. Just put whatever their degree is. You just can't count them in that one question I mentioned. So that's strictly for the MLS. How is the distinction between a librarian and library staff defined? That is sort of a local decision, but a librarian position would be a professional versus a paraprofessional. And that is based probably on how you advertise the positions, or how how your town pays the positions.
If it's separated into departments, your heads of department, you may refer to as librarians, even if they don't have the degree, and that's fine. Your titles are your titles.
Yeah.
What Jen just said about that particular question, where at the federal level, they want to survey the profession, and so it's when the librarian title matches up with the librarian MLS degree.
It could be based on what you require. If you require a master's degree for the position, then that would be considered a professional position at your library.
There are
So
libraries that require all, reference librarians, the head of circulation, the head of technical services, the children's librarian, all to have the MLS. But not necessarily. And so really what your titles are fine, so long as when you answer the question about the MLS professional degree, that you're only counting those people in professional positions with the professional degree.
Here's another question from Lise. If we called a staff member something different in the past and now realize it's wrong, that's fine. You can change it and just leave a note. And I would leave a note for yourself, but then also leave a note in the federal and just say, I moved a position into another category. You may or may not get flagged on that in this system, but I will likely get a flag. It's not good. If you're a small library and you only have 3 people and you change 2 of them, then you're going to probably get a flag. But if you're a large librarian and you move one person, a large library and you move one person, it's probably not going to flag it. But if for your recording's sake, and you move them, you'll want to leave a note. What if somebody is serving in 2 positions in a temporary situation? So I think what we decided with this is that if one of those positions is the director or the assistant director, you would count that in that position. If it's split between something else, you just have to choose one and then leave yourself a note.
And if they have a permanent position and they're temporarily in another position, you would put it in the permanent position. Because remember, why we're gathering this information, why we report this out, is so that we can look at the profession in the state, and it helps other libraries look and see what positions are out there when they're making their case to their trustee boards and to their municipalities about funding additional positions within their library.
Gloria, we have IT librarian and marketing librarian who are both department heads. Are they OT, other positions? Is that what you mean, OT? Yes. So if your marketing librarian is marketing for everyone and not just, I don't know why you would do the children's department. Yeah, you can count those in the other.
And I would count them in other because you're going to list them then.
Yeah.
And that shows that you have an IT person and you have a marketing person. Whereas if you put them under department head, they are anonymous in terms of what their role is. And although it's nice to have them in that role, this way, again, you're giving additional information not only to us, but to the state as a whole.
In a small library, it seems everyone besides the director is support staff, no one supervises, etc. Would it make sense to call them support staff? Yeah, so if there's one library, if the director is the only librarian in the library, then they're the only librarian position in your library, and then the rest are assistants, and then you need to figure out, or associates, I think the PLS calls it, and then you just need to figure out whether or not they're senior or regular. So if they're only working 2 to 7 hours a week and they don't supervise anybody else, I would put them in, I would personally put them in, sorry, I'm going back to. Library technician. But at least the important thing is that you're consistent,
Okay.
You just leave yourself notes.
Can I just ask, because that's where we've had them,
Yeah.
but this time I thought you said the technician had to do with technology.
The technical services librarian is technical is the technical services.
I thought that's what you
Title
said.
that the IMLS chooses doesn't have to match your title.
Okay,
So-
but that's where I had them, is in this one, so that's
Yeah.
where I'm gonna keep them. Okay,
Yeah.
I
And,
thought that was
you're not
wrong.
alone. Many libraries are like that. There's only one person who is, got the degree or is in charge of the library.
Some libraries call them library assistants or library associates, or library technicians, and it just they all fall into under the category of library technician.
All right. Wait another second for any other questions, and then we'll move on to holdings. Oh, and I just did something that you guys might do. If there are multiple pages, you can't click on the title. It's not going to go anywhere. So you have to click on the part that is associated with it. It's a little weird and wonky there. But you'll see I went to holdings part 1. All right. So holdings part 1. Holdings as of June 30th, 2023. So this is your basically your collection, the stuff that patrons can use in your library as of tomorrow. So if you had an electronic subscription, if you ordered Hoopla and you ended that subscription last like August, you wouldn't count that here. So even though you had something for one part of the year. Holdings are broken down into 3 categories: adult, children's, and young adult. If you don't label your young adult materials, you can kind of see through our training that young adults haven't usually been given their own sort of space. If you don't label your young adult materials as young adult materials, just put them wherever you do. So if they're in the children's department, count them in children's. If they're an adult, count them as adult. And then leave yourself a note, because at some point you might split that collection out, and you'll want to know why there's a difference. So for holdings, we have the same questions for each category. So how many print books do you have in your collection? And then you can pull up this and it will give you a definition. So, books are books. Print periodicals, newspapers, and other print serials. This is looking for your volumes. So if you have Time magazine, you can count how many volumes you have of that. So if you have the current year and you collect 5 years past, you would count those 5 years and you would count the volumes in that, not the individual issues. The volume is usually on the little title, the little bits of information on the cover of the magazine. So you can go and see, Time maybe does 2 volumes in a year. And if you do any sort of, if you go and check and actually look at this, leave yourself a note so you know how you counted previously. Audio, so if you still have CDs, if you do, you have audiobooks, books on cassette or tape, on CD, playaways, or any other audiobook format, you would do those here. Video, so if you have, Blu-ray, DVDs, other sort of physical video forms, you would put those here for adults. Ebooks, so if you'll get information from your networks in a few weeks about how many ebooks you have, and you put those here. If you buy additional copies of ebooks, you would put those here. Downloadable audio, audiobooks, music, again, the same types of materials, but in downloadable form, you would put that here. Downloadable video, how many of those do you have? Materials in electronic format. So these are things like software, computer software, or a computer gaming software, cartridges, stuff like that. So say you have a Nintendo Switch, if you let people, if you have multiple games for your Switch, you could put those here. If you buy software for your desktop computers for your patrons to use, you can count that here. But it's based on, like if you get the Microsoft Office suite, that's one thing. Materials in microform. So if you have microfiche or microfilm, or you have rolls, you would count that. The definitions have some suggestions on how to count them. So if you have a ton, you can do, count one row and then multiply by the number of rows. This is another space where I would suggest you leave yourself a note for how to count that so that it's consistent from year to year. And then miscellaneous. So these are all of the library of things items that you have. These would be if you have, kits for adults, or if, whatever other things that aren't covered in the previous sections would go here. Then this would be total adult materials. And then they're the same categories for young adults. And then the same categories for children's. So books, print periodicals, audio, video, ebooks, downloadable audio, downloadable video, electronic format, microform, miscellaneous. So, in your kids department, if you have a bunch of puppets, you can include those there for patrons to use. Children's materials, then it will total it up for you. So these are all of items, lots of totals. And then we get into your subscriptions and electronic collections. So how many print serial subscriptions do you have? So with that example with Time Magazine, you have one subscription to Time Magazine for the current year, not 5 years of subscriptions for the past year. So how many of those do you have? How many electronic serial subscriptions? So do you subscribe to the New York Times online, or do you have a local newspaper that you pay for, their online access? Electronic collections. So how many databases or systems do you subscribe to on behalf of your library for patrons to use? Like this includes Hoopla, this includes Ancestry, this includes, any of those things where with their library card or at the library or however it works, the patrons can go in and choose what they want, and you pay for that access. It's not the same as Overdrive, because Overdrive is an ebook platform and you can pick out the individual titles. With Hoopla, you don't have that. So any of those platforms, Creative Bug, there's like a greatest, the great courses, you can pay for access to that database. So those are the electronic collections where patrons can go in and get a bunch of things. So this is what you buy at your library. And then other subscriptions. So this would include your museum pass subscriptions. So if your friends pay for museum passes for you and they buy 2 sets of the Museum of Science that are super popular, that would count as 2 subscriptions. You don't count the number of passes you get. So it's how many subscriptions do you have? And then next. Then how many subscriptions does your network subscribe to, or how many databases does your network subscribe to? This could be 0 because we have so many at the state level, but you'll get this number from your network. This is a field that was previously grayed off. So we're just alerting everyone that this year you need to put your number in. We can't go in and do it by network in our system. So
right. For the people who are network people, it's not a new question. It used to be network and local databases. It smushed into one question, and then there was no way of being able to separate out. So local is in one place, network is in another. And if you'll notice in H102, we've already put in the state electronic collections databases there. So these would be, the network databases that you subscribe to on behalf of, or the network subscribes to on behalf of the entire network. And the local ones are the things that you individually pay for yourself. And when we get to the circulation piece or the usage piece, there are different places that Jen will go into where you're going to have to find that information. The easiest part is the network one.
And again, this could be 0. I don't know what the networks are doing for their own databases now, but it may be that you know, the network gets a discount on subscribing to a language software, say, and you would put that number here. And then this would be the local, these would be the added up. Last year, we didn't have this pre-filled. It's a nightmare for me, but this year we have it pre-filled. The state has 58 databases that the patrons can use. And then those go into your holdings totals. All right, so I'm going to pause here for holdings related questions. Okay, so we don't keep a full year of any print magazine, so I don't usually keep them as a holding. Is that correct? So I would still probably include it if the patrons can use it at all. Maybe just count it as one. I don't know. Do you like just have one issue out, like 1 month at a time, Gloria?
We usually have 2 or 3, and we don't have room to keep all the back ones.
You don't keep them. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think I would still count that as one, maybe for each of those.
Yeah,
Because you
would
don't want to
count it as
get credit for the fact that you have them at all.
Okay,
right, because holdings is different from subscription. So yes, you have one holding, you know, whether it's, you know, 3 months or 3 years. And, you know, if you're keeping it for 3 months, I would count it as a holding.
I would count it as one. Yeah.
okay, I thought it was supposed to be a whole year. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Bethany, I remember a question from last year about read along audiobooks, Wonder Books, Bach books, etc. But I can't remember where they're supposed to be counted as print books or audiobooks. I think we landed on it depends on how you catalog them and where you put them. So, but if their primary purpose is to read books aloud to kids and kids can follow along, I would put them in audiobooks. But if it's just something where, you know, it's a full book and you shelve it with the books, I would do it as book.
Yeah, it does depend on where you shelve it, but it also, you know, if it's teaching kids to read so that they're reading along, maybe it belongs in books. Again, just pick a spot, put a note that that will remind you, and then you can remind us for next year.
Yeah.
Because that was my first reaction. I don't remember what we said. Oh dear.
Yeah.
And then be consistent from year to year.
Priya, hi Priya. Age 47, if we have 5 subscription to Time Magazine, should it be counted as 1 or 5? You would count that as 5.
But a subscription is different from a volume. So if you have 5 years of Time Magazine or 5 volumes of Time Magazine, that's still only 1 subscription, unless you're paying for when each month you get five of the same issue of the magazine. It's not by issue.
Lise, if the CW Mars is our network database only, do we put it in the ones yeah. So if CW Mars, if you don't have any local collections, that's fine. Many people don't. You could just put a 0 in for the local and then put in whatever CW Mars has for databases.
Pretty much, unless there are groups of libraries that get together and have a collection. Every library in a network will probably have the same number of network databases.
Yeah.
In other words, you know, if your network subscribes to 5 databases, every library in the network reports 5.
So Eileen Chandler from Clams, hi Eileen. There's Novelist Plus for that. So for anybody on here who's in Clams, you know your number is 1. Libby, is question H48 electronic serial subscription for local use only, or does it include network? Electronic, anything your network buys for you can be counted in the holdings. Are museum passes counted under miscellaneous with other things and also under subscriptions? No, they're only counted under subscriptions for holdings. And then when we get to circulation, they will be counted under miscellaneous there. That's the one thing that flips.
We're hoping at some point that they actually separate it out so that you have it balances out where it is in holdings matches where you report it in circulation.
Asked about H48 local versus network because H100 now breaks out network databases. You said H48 gets New York Times subscription, but we have New York Times for the network. Yeah, so you won't count it twice. So if your network buys the New York Times subscription, you can put it under the network databases. Although that's an electronic. What? Yeah, so that's a good one. That's another one, just pick. I think next year, these definitions are going to go into more current detail. And so next year, we'll probably have a better answer for that. So I would, Libby, just put wherever you would normally do that. Yeah. Cape Cod's time online is for a subgroup. Where is that counted as not network? So each of those libraries, Eileen, would count that themselves. And so the libraries who don't subscribe to it would just not include that in their count. All right, so now we'll go on to circulation. It's broken into the same categories. And for those of you who have done this for a number of years, you'll notice that at the top of circulation, we move right into books. It used to be that the electronic subscription information was first. But it was just really confusing to do that back to back and not follow in order. So we moved it. The back end of our statistics, the numbering, even though it's different in here, the way we do it is it's okay with our system at MBLC. But just be aware that we did tweak that. Total circulation, adult. So again, circulation numbers. Now, your networks will have a lot of this information for you, but they need time to pull it all together. So if you are intending to do this on Saturday, you're not going to be able to get it done on Saturday because you need this information from your networks, unless you don't have a network. And if you do have all this information, good for you. But most people are not going to be able to do that. So give them time, and I'm sure they all will let you know when that information is ready. Some have a dashboard, so you can, it's almost instantaneous, but others need a little more time. So your adult circulation. So again, those physical books, how many of those did you have? How many print materials did you circulate? Print periodicals and newspapers. How much the physical audio and physical video did you circulate for adults? How many ebook circulation did you get? And the ebook circulation, I'm going to flag this. The ebook circulation, if you have your own ebooks on top of what the network has, you're going to need to add those two numbers together. Downloadable audio, downloadable video, materials in electronic format, the materials in microform. You may not circulate microform, so you're not going to have any number here, and that's okay. Miscellaneouses, and this is where the museum passes show up. They were in subscriptions for holdings, but they're in miscellaneous for this. If you have hotspots, your hotspots, would go into whichever category, I'm assuming adults. So your circulation for your miscellaneous, your library of things, your museum passes, and then young adults, the same categories: books, print periodicals, physical audio and video, ebooks, downloadable audio, downloadable video, materials in electronic format. If you have a lot of video games, you might have a high circ number here. Microform, miscellaneous for young adult, and then that circs. So if you have, like we mentioned, that switch earlier, if you circulate the switch machine itself, the device, you would include that here, how many times that went out. And children, same categories. And your miscellaneous for children's might be higher because you might have a ton of kits for children's. If you circulate puppets, that circulation there. And then we moved the usage of online collections. And so this is your total as of tomorrow. And then this is what your usage is of local electronic collections. You don't count ebooks, downloadable and audio and video. Anything that was counted above, you don't count here. So, or on prior prior counts. You don't want to double count anything, so just pick the category. But so how many ancestry sessions did you have? How many Mango language whatevers you did? And this would be a spot where it would be very good of you for yourself to leave yourself a note, because each of those platforms has their own way of determining these sessions. So it could be a session, they're not going to unify their language because we have this question. So there is some
Actually,
language
you
here.
can't count sessions, and that's why Mango Language has changed its language from session to a lesson. So just avoid anything that's listed under session and be consistent from year to year how you count.
Yep. And we do have information here about, it could be a download, it could be, viewing something online, streaming, so it depends on how it works. And that, you could say, Nicole gets this information from this person at Ancestry. Whatever notes help make your compilation of this easier, I would recommend writing. And then, so it's local first, then network. So you'll get a number from your network about how many, however the usage of, novelist you'll get from clams, whatever that usage is. And then the usage of statewide electronic collections. So the number comes from the MBLC. We buy the databases, but MLS is the Massachusetts Library System is who has the statistics on this. And so let me just check and see if I bookmarked this. We're going to put this on our website. So the MLS has an entire page for the statewide databases. So if we go back to their homepage, down at the bottom, they have a page, a link for databases. And this is where they keep track of the usage. And so if you go here, FY23 statistics, and they have an entire Tableau thing here to keep track of all these stats. So what you will do after whenever they announce that it's complete for this year, I usually go in and do, well, you could type in your own library name. That's probably the smartest thing to do.
And please keep in mind that the networks need time to gather the statistics. MLS needs even more time because it's not just for public libraries, but it's for all libraries, and it's for the whole state, not just an individual network. So, and multiple databases as well. They do a fabulous job, and it does take some time. So if you have, that you have statistics that you need for your report, please be patient.
So Abington isn't on here, but so I live in Salem, so I pulled out Salem's list, and then you can get that information. So far this year there have been 5,462. That was through May. So you'll want to wait, and let this update. So this is a really useful and interesting page. And so that's where you will get your number for here.
And if you have local databases, Ancestry and that type of thing, do leave yourself a note, because you only look possibly at those statistics year to year, and remembering where you got that information prior to, in prior years is important.
Yeah. So local, that's you, network is your network, and the statewide is you'll get the information from the MLS. Then you'll get your totals, and it will circulate. It's going to calculate in a bunch of different categories. So you'll get each, you'll get the print stuff together, you'll get your non-print stuff together. Then circulation information. So if you are not in clams, you can just put 0 here. If you're in clams, you'll get a number from them because the system double counts a couple of things. So we're in the ILL and loans reported as patron circulation. And so this year you'll get information from CLAMS, and then next year CLAMS system is changing. So maybe we can actually just get rid of this question next year. Sorry, I moved on to the interlibrary loans reported as patron circulation. So for most libraries, you're going to just put 0 here. And then we're moving on to ILL and non-resident circulation information. So interlibrary loans received from other libraries, and you include network transfers. So these are the physical items that have been received at your library that have to be returned. And so this is stuff, you know, if you're in Noble, this is stuff from Noble, but if you get stuff from CW Mars or MBLN or Minuteman or whatever, you would count all of those here.
This traditional ILLs that you would get through MLS, let's say, and also anything that you get from the Commonwealth catalog.
Yeah.
And the network transfer.
And the network. And then ILL items received that need not be returned. So if you reached out to another library who had, you know, a microfilm and they made a copy for you and you gave that to your patron, you know, you would do that here. Or if, you know, same with a journal at a college or something. So if you got something for a patron that doesn't need to be returned, you would put that here. And then how many items left your library and went elsewhere. So that could be in your own network or the other networks. And then how many items did you ship out that don't need to be returned? So if you had the microfilm or you had a journal or a newspaper and you made an article, made a copy for someone. And then the next category is the non-resident circulation transactions. And this is a really important category. It's kind of the most important one related to state aid, because one part of your state aid award is based on this number. And since we didn't go through that part first, I'll explain it a little bit more here. So one of the best things about being part of the state aid program and being certified is that your library users can go to other libraries and use those libraries. That's the key component. The reciprocity, where you have to lend stuff to other libraries and to other people of other communities. That's you know, aside from the money you get from the state, that benefit for your library patrons is a huge part of this program. But when somebody comes into your library from another town, there is a cost to that. And so part of your award is an offset for that cost. So what we want to know is how many items did you circulate at the desk? So someone came into your library and borrowed materials to Massachusetts municipalities certified for state aid. So this would be, you know, if you have a great parking lot and people come to your library instead of their own because they don't have a parking lot like I do, you know, Beverly or Peabody, for me, they're going to get a non-resident circulation offset because I use their libraries more than I use my own because I need parking. Then number of items circulated to residents of Mass municipalities who are not certified. So right now, there are only 4 towns in Massachusetts who are not certified or not part of the state aid program. And if you are a neighboring community and you lend to them, that's totally up to you. You won't get an offset for that because this is to, you know, acknowledge the burden of the reciprocity. So if they're not certified, they're not helping your patrons get access to materials. And then the number of items circulated to residents of other states. So that's very nice of you. You know, we have a lot of vacationers who come to the Seacoast and the Cape, Berkshires, you know, border states. You may circulate to people outside of the state, but they're not part of the system. So you won't get an offset for this. So you're going to get this number to us when you submit this form, if for some reason you can't, someone last year was out for, had a surgery scheduled, and so they weren't going to be around to get this all done in time. We need this number, because without this number, we can't award anyone state aid because the state aid is based on this number. And so it's really important. This number, matters a lot. And I'll show you on the form where you can see how much it actually means. During the pandemic, the offset was as high as 28 cents. And then it's lower than that now because, everybody is sort of sharing the wealth, but you do get a transaction per a little bit of money per transaction. All right, circulation information. This is totaling this up.
And these are federal answers on, C-103, 104. We count things differently. Electronic content use at the federal level includes ebooks. We do not. So so these numbers are slightly off from that. And we, in our statistics, provide you with the numbers that you need in order to be able to differentiate between physical, print, non-print, and electronic use.
All right, I'm going to pause because we are now at services and see if there are circulation questions. Okay, yeah, that's a good question. Can you give some examples of what downloadable audio and downloadable video is for both holdings and circulation? So Hoopla is not. So Overdrive, I don't know. They were going to do some videos that were sign language related, so those could possibly work. Does anybody else have suggestions for that? That would be, streaming video on one of those other platforms, but most of them would be that electronic collection. I don't know if somebody else, I can't think of any off the top of my head, so if anybody else has other suggestions, that doesn't come from Overdrive. I missed that children's ILL. Can you clarify? There is no children's ILL question. It's just the total ILL. Which ones? How do we tell if we lend to non-certified libraries? Yeah, so they're it's Alfred, Savoy, Montgomery, and
It's Monroe.
Monroe. Yeah,
Monroe, not Montgomery.
not Montgomery, right?
No,
What's
no.
the one we're working on to get them certified?
Alfred.
Alfred, yeah. So there are 4 small libraries in Western Mass. And then if any libraries become decertified, we would send out information about that, because that does matter. And Marita is asking, how do we tell if we lend? So that if you're in a network, the network will be able to pull out those statistics for you.
The networks most likely have what they call a reciprocal borrower report. So you and they can pull those numbers for you. And they usually report your library and outside, and they actually can identify which libraries non-residents are coming to your library.
And so the big deal is when a library becomes decertified. And if you are a neighboring town or city of a library that becomes decertified, this has happened, Wareham was decertified for a while. Brockton, I think, was on the verge of being decertified, and I worked in that network. If a library all of a sudden becomes decertified, it creates a huge burden on the other communities. And
ordinarily it would mean that the library was not meeting the minimum standards, but the municipal appropriation requirement, and it would mean that the commissioners had denied a waiver. So you apply, need a waiver, there was a disproportionate cut, you present your application for a waiver, in January and the commissioners vote in February. They have not certified any of the waiver applicants, and the disproportionate cuts have been minimal, even in the last few years. And last year we didn't have any disproportionate cuts, and there were only 8 waivers. If a library closes its doors and is not offering any services at all, they're immediately decertified. And we have had, even in this year, had municipalities threaten to close libraries if overrides did not pass. So if that's the case, I would send out a message notifying everyone if a library was decertified, municipality was decertified, and then at the next meeting, the commissioners would affirm that decision. But at the moment, we have 4, the very small libraries that Jen mentioned. And I do think Weichi put up a link in the chat that lists those libraries. Yep.
All right, and so there's a question about Hoopla. I've always counted Hoopla audio and music as downloadable audio as long as with Freegal and Overdrive. Hoopla and Freegal technically are electronic collections, and it's sort of based on, you know, if the patron goes in and chooses what they want and they have access to everything all at once, that's a collection of things. Overdrive, you only have access to one item at a time. I know it's a, you know, kind of a semantics related thing. Next year's definitions will be more.
Hoopla is an electronic collection, and it's
Yeah.
because it's not curated. You don't choose the titles necessarily.
The
And there's a
library
big
doesn't
movement.
choose the
The
titles.
library doesn't, and it's a collection of things. Some of it may be streaming, but some of it may just be, you know, quick parts of collections. So that's why it's there. If you're changing it, put a note to yourself that you've moved it, because the numbers may trigger a question that you need to answer before you can submit your application.
Yeah, so all of these, and we don't have a list of the electronic collections because there are a ton of electronic collections out there. Some librarians have lists, you know, that are, you know, a full page on their website. You know, there are like access to nursing training books that you can get access to online. So, and while we don't do the collection development in Overdrive, Overdrive is designed as a one item per use, and it is a curated collection.
It has a timed circulation, and it is returned or it disappears at the end. So it has more of a traditional circulation model than an electronic collection.
The Kelly Blue Book, I think you can buy a subscription to, which is multiple things that your users can look at. The Chilton Auto Guides, you know, that is an electronic collection or a database. So, you know, and Eileen's got, you know, asked that examples would be good. So, you know, we've already said Hoopla, Canoply, Mango Languages, any of those language learning things, the Creative Bugs. There's a speaker series, the Great Courses, any collection of items that you subscribe to, where your patrons can get access, and they go in and choose what they want. And that's why it's not, we can't give comprehensive answers on that. Let me see. Okay, no other questions on that. Then we'll move on. Here we go. All right. So now we are at services at the main library and all outlets during FY23. So you'll notice we're at the first tab here under services. Total hours your main library was open to the public. This is the actual count of hours. So if you don't have a spreadsheet somewhere keeping track of how many hours you're open each day, you should probably set that up. Some libraries, I think, Ginny, I don't remember where she's working now. She sent one out into the state aid group last week that she uses at her library. But this is an actual count of hours. So if you are closed for a holiday, that's fine. So don't just multiply your hours. If you're open 40 hours a week, don't multiply that by 52 because that's never going to be accurate. You're going to have holidays. You might have a snow closing. You might close a few hours for professional development. So we want your total hours that the main library was open. And then how many hours of weeks you were open to the public. It's 52 is the standard. So if you were open all year, you can just put 52. If it was a little, it's 52.6. If you're open 5 days or whatever, 52 is fine. If you have branches, how many hours were they open? And this is collectively. So if you have 3 branches, we want to know that. Total hours, the bookmobiles. Let me just actually double check that. Yeah, no. If you have a bookmobile, how many hours was that open to the public? How many Saturdays? So this is a number of weeks. How many Saturdays were you open? So some libraries are open Saturdays year round, some close for the summer, some close for the winter on Saturdays. So how many weeks is that? And then how many hours on Saturdays were you open to the public? And so if you have branches, you would count those. Number of Sundays you were open to the public and the hours on Sundays. And again, it's the total system. So if you have branches, you would add that up. Total hours, the library system was open after 5 p.m. to the public. So some library tiers, you are required to be open at least, a certain number of evening hours. So this is after 5 p.m. A full hour is after 5. Total attendance in your library system. This is physical attendance, how many people came through your doors. And then it wants to know, did you actually count this or is it an estimate? So did you use a people counter or did you do a survey? And then please be truthful on this. If you didn't actually count, don't put that it's an actual count because if you have a 0 at the end, it's going to flag it for me and I have to go in and change it. So actual count, you use the people counter or it's an estimate. The number of reference transactions you have in your library system, and is this an actual count or an estimate? Estimates are totally fine. And then there's a definition of reference transaction here. So it's not a directional transaction to the bathroom. It is when, the librarian needs to interact using information sources. It can be over email, don't forget those, over the telephone. Library patrons of any age, whether or not it's at a public service desk. So if you're, doing something behind the scenes and helping someone, that's a reference transaction. If you are, you're helping somebody download an audiobook to their phone, you can count that as a reference transaction. Then we get into programs. These expanded quite a bit a few years ago, so I'm gonna walk through them and emphasize those differences. So we wanted to know the total number of live programs for adults that are held in your system. So if you have branches, you add them all together, either in person or virtually. So if you are in person, count that. If you're doing a Zoom with a famous author, that's a virtual program, but it's live, like they're talking with your patrons, that counts as a live program for adults. So how many of those did you have? And then how many people came to those? And then the same question for young adults, how many live programs, virtual or in person, did you have? And then what was the attendance for those? And then live programs for school kids, 6 to 11. And then how many of those programs and what the attendance was. And then live programs for young children, birth to 5 in the system. So how many programs, and then the attendance. And for this age group, obviously the kids aren't there by themselves, so you count the adults who come as well. And then if you have general audience, intergenerational stuff, you do a movie night during the summer that everybody's welcome to, you can count those separately. So the total number of live programs for general audience, and then what your attendance was at those. Just make sure there's no duplication in these. So if you do an adult program and then you count it as adult, don't count it under general as well. Then we need to know, the location of this. So how many were in person and on site? How many programs did you have in person and on site? And then what was that attendance? So that would be the total of all of your in person on, it's not broken down by age group. Then how many in-person off-site programs do you have? Marita, I know in Linfield, you have the meeting room where you do most of the programming. So you would count those as off-site, the number and the attendance. How many live virtual program sessions do you have? So again, that's that author session. And what was the attendance at those? And then how many recorded programs? Are you still doing story times where your children's librarian reads a book and then posts it online? And then the total views within 30 days. Then the section of self-directed activities and passive programming. So these are things like if you leave a puzzle out, if you have a story walk, take and makes. So these collections were added during the pandemic to really get at the breadth of the work that people were doing to connect with their patrons. It doesn't count as an in-person or live program unless you're actually there doing something. So if you have a story walk and it's hosted by the library and a librarian walks them through, you can count that up in the other category. But if it is truly passive, you would put it here. So we got questions last year. So if you change your book every month, then that would be 12 story walks. So you would do 12 here plus whatever else. The trickier thing is how many people participated in these. So this is never going to be a perfect answer. You're never going to know every time somebody looks at that story walk, but do your best. People have lots of different ideas on how to count that, but there is no official way to count that. Then we're on to volunteers. Your number of non-subsidized volunteers, and then how many hours they work total for the year. Non-subsidized volunteers mean they can't be compensated in some way. So if you have senior citizens working off their taxes in the tax abatement program, they can't count here and those hours don't count here. If you have a high school student working on a portfolio and they have community service hours, that doesn't count. If someone is court ordered, that doesn't count. Friends working on the book sale counts. If you have trustees that volunteer at programs, that counts, but the trustees meetings don't count because that's the business, that's their job sort of. So that distinction here is a big one. And then you can count someone, like a lot of your senior citizens will stay, they'll do their, however many hours they need to do, and then they continue to volunteer. You can count them if they do that. Then the number of registered borrowers. So this is the number of people who have your library cards. And then the next one is a subset of that. So how many people have your library's library card? And then how many of those people were residents of your municipality? And you should be able to get that from your network. Has the file of registered borrowers been purged since June 30th, 2020? So in the last 3 years, that is supposed to happen. So hopefully that answer is yes. How many branch libraries you have? You can answer 0 or leave it blank. Library bookmobile 0 or leave it blank. We're starting to collect questions on overdue fines. So as of June 30th, so tomorrow, if you have a policy that goes into place tomorrow, what is your policy on, do you charge overdue fines for anyone when they fail to return physical print materials. So eventually this will be expanded to other kinds of things, but for now, the only thing that's being counted is, do you charge fines on print materials? Then there's a breakdown. So do you charge fines to young kids, birth through age 5, if they don't return their books, physical print materials? Do you charge the school age kids 6 through 11 if they don't return their books? Youth 12 through 18 if they don't return their physical print materials. Adults 19 through 54, and then seniors is a huge age gap, and I completely want to fight that number. Do you charge adult fines for adults if they don't return physical print materials? And then another question is, do you charge fines when they fail to return non-print materials? So the breakdown is for print, and then we are asking, how about those other materials? Do you charge fines for that? Then this will total that service hours. How many public were in internet and electronic services as of June 30th? How many public use internet computers do you have? So if you have some computers that are just, you don't count catalog computers, you don't count typewriters. These are computers connected to the internet. Do you have Wi-Fi for public to use? And it includes the children's area. So all of your computers together that have internet access. Do you have Wi-Fi available for public use within the main library? Yes or no? Did you hold formal training sessions in the use of the internet for library users? It's not just the internet, it can be, do you have classes on how to use electronics? Sort of any of those, do you have classes for technology? Yes or no? If it's a one-off where you're just helping people with their technology, with their ebook readers or whatever, that would count as a reference transaction. It doesn't count here. Number of users of the public internet term computers in a typical week. So just pay attention to that. And then, is this an actual count or an estimate? And then, do you have an acceptable use policy for internet access? Yes or no? Do you use technological measures? Do you filter to access, to block access to certain content? No, yes for everyone, or yes for children. Then online services, how many hits were recorded on the library's website during FY23? This is the last year for this question. So once you turn this in, you don't need to try and find that information anymore. How many wireless sessions does the library provide? This can be tricky to find. So I would again leave yourself a note on who your contact is, say at Comcast, or you have to ask somebody at town hall, or do your best to get this information. And then, is this an actual count or an estimate? Is your website optimized for mobile devices? And then this will total up for you. And then services to children, average hours per week of services to children 11 and under during the past year. So this is the number of hours all staff in the library worked on something related to children's. So it's not just your children's librarians, it is also your catalogers who do children's materials. It's your circulation staff if you don't have a circ desk in the children's room. If somebody's making flyers for the entire library, how much of their time do they usually spend on children's? And then, so there are some definitions here, and then the different services. I would definitely leave yourself a note for this one as well. So, in your local notes, say, counted Maria in marketing 50% of her time, so say 20 hours. And then list everybody else that you have there. Then SC2, this is another question where they're looking specifically for library positions. So this is that the librarian position, not the associates, not the assistants, holding an MLS degree. providing library services to children 11 and under. So it's going to be a subset of that previous number. And it can include the director. It can include, you know, your circulation person if they're a degreed person. If your children's librarian doesn't have an MLS, they're not counted in this. So even though they're spending 100% of their time, they're only counted here because this question is looking at MLS degreed positions that are libraries. If you only have assistants in your children's room, then you would have nothing there except for the directors, if the director has the MLS degree. Then how many public access computers do you have in your children's room that have access to the internet, not just like the stations and, you know, other things. If you have computers that connect to the internet. And then does your library have a homework center? So this is a formal homework center. It's not just, you know, you have dictionaries and pencil sharpeners. This is, you know, a structured formal setup. Governance, do you have a friends group? How many people are in your friends group? This can take a little while to get, so I recommend reaching out to your friends group as soon as possible so that they can get that information to you. You don't want to be working on this question on the last week of your ARIS. Name of your friends group, the name of your president, the email address of the president, and if you have a president who doesn't want to give that information, who's the actual contact for the friends. Trustees. How are your trustees appointed? How do your trustees get their jobs? Basically, are they appointed, elected, self-perpetuating, ex officio, or other? And then your total here, you know, if all of them are appointed, then it'll come up this way. If the trustees are named to the board in other ways, describe how. So, you know, if there's some other process, do you have a foundation? Contact information for your foundation. Is your library a city library, a town library, or is it a cooperation or association library? Who owns the current building? So that group. Who is responsible for hiring the director, the city or the town, the library trustees, the association or corporation, or is it a combined effort? Does the library director have a contract? And who is responsible for signing the contract? Main library facilities. So again, these grayed out fields are pre-filled for you. Your square footage, your current building was built in 1997. So again, if you've had a renovation or a construction project, we'll need to update this. So flag it for us. The library was mostly recently renovated. How many dedicated parking spaces do you have? So these are parking spots reserved for library patrons, not shared lots, not staff spaces, you know, not street parking, designated library only parking spots. Seating capacity of the library. So this is, you know, you'll go around and you'll count, you know, do you have a couch? How many seats is that? How many tables do you have? You know, you want to wander around and count that. Did you get a study carrel this year? Is that a new thing? You do not count meeting rooms in this. Then the meeting room questions, how many meeting rooms do you have? And the seating capacity of your largest meeting room. How many individual or group study rooms do you have? And then how many times the meeting rooms were used for all purposes except for staff meetings. So this would be all of the programs. This would be any of the friends meetings or the trustees meetings. This would be anytime the public reserves your meeting room. This would be, you know, if you have a garden club that comes in and meets 12 times, you know, once a month, that would be 12. You would count the garden club for 12. And then this is sort of the great catch-all for explaining why your numbers are different. This comes to us. Service conditions that cause figures on this form to vary substantially from last year. So COVID was huge, you know, and so writing you know, a lot of people just wrote COVID and that's fine. If you're a new director, or you're not new director, that doesn't matter. But if you're a director who's new to that library, so you've got somebody new in, they might count things differently. And so you might say, you know, we've always counted, I don't even know what you would do there. Young adult books in one way, and I'm going to count them differently. So that's actually a good example. We separated out young adult. Or a lot of people put young adult nonfiction in the nonfiction section. So if you do that, if you have a major reading project, you know, and that happens a lot when there's a new director. So anything, if there is a change that's made a difference on your form, we don't know that you've changed directors in this spot if everything is mostly the same. All right, and we did the intellectual freedom questions already, so I'm not going to go over those again right now. I know that some people came in later, so we can, you know, hang out for a few minutes and talk about those. One thing I wanted to remind everybody of is that the statistics that are on the library's website are pulled from these reports that you're doing. And the information that you put in this form is public and is FOIA-able. So if you leave notes, just be aware that if somebody wanted to, they could read them. I can read everything. Waichi and Mary Rose can read everything if they wanted to. So in your local notes, just be aware that if somebody wanted to FOIA that information, and that might be important in the intellectual freedom section if you leave us any notes on that, just, you know, be aware that somebody could ask to see them. And then I'm going to review again. So you would go, before you submit, you would go to your ARIS signature page, print that out. And then you want to show your status again. And again, this is the important part, and resolve any of these edit checks. So any of the places where your numbers didn't match your previous answers. Finish any unanswered questions if you forgot them, and then the flagged questions. So I had flagged a bunch towards the end there because I needed to get answers. So then you just unflag, you answer and unflag, and you can answer right in this. You don't have to go back to the survey to answer, which is nice.
And the little red message that Jen pulled up first going to the edit checks did say, put this in the federal note. Which answers the question about how do you know where to put this information. And sometimes you'll get an error message and it's not necessarily a clear error message. And the first place I look is to see, oh, they put it in state note, not federal note, or federal note, not state note. And oftentimes I will move it for you and may leave you a note in local notes if that's what I did. But that's just, if you're having difficulty figuring it out, that's the first place to check to see why it's not taking your note.
And I added some local notes. If I had to make a change to your data, I might have added a local note in your ARIS or in your, it happens more often in the financial form where, you know, what you said you got from your town didn't match the documents you got from your town. We went in and fixed that rather than making you log back in. And then you submit, and then when you submit, it does lock your survey. And so again, if you need to get back access to that, you can email us.
Oftentimes people hit submit and save. Just call us.
Yeah.
Email us,
we can
text us on our cell phones, and we'll open it as soon as we can.
all right, so
There are some questions.
yeah,
Jen?
pause, and then I'll go and show where the regulations are. All right, Mary Rose, what if you only charge fines on one small section of materials? In this case, our speed reads, everything else is fine free. I would still answer yes, that you charge fines on that last question where it asks non-print.
I actually respectfully
You disagree?
because speed reads are additional copies of things that you circulate. titles that you circulate regularly that wouldn't have fines. It's a separate collection. I assume, and I'm making this assumption, that they can't be held and they can't be renewed. So it'd almost be like a rental collection. So in a way, you're not charging a fine, you're just, it is almost like a rental collection. If I'm wrong on that, please, unmute yourself and say, no, you're wrong and Jen is right. And that could be.
You should default to whatever Mary Rose says.
I would argue that you would say no, because that same title is available to circulate without a fine elsewhere. So it really isn't quite the fine issue.
All right, Priya, formal training sessions and use of internet, we count this under computer programs. There isn't a section for computer programs, so I'm not sure what you mean there.
Maybe use of so for training purposes. So if you're using it, if you're counting it under use of the internet, sure, agreed. That's the regular count. But this is pulling that out as a computer program. And again, I think it's specific. It's important that you count this as a formal training program if that's what it is.
So what I was really asking was that we have computer classes for the public, right?
Yep.
So that's where we teach them how to use the internet.
Yep.
So that is a formal class. So would that class, right now we count it as under programming.
Yeah,
So
I wouldn't count it under programming. If it's a class and a training on the computer, I would count it in the training sessions in the technology.
Agreed.
Okay, so a class on Excel or Word would be programming, but a class on how to use the internet would go under this?
No, so the internet, that's an old title. So any sort of technology classes that involve training people how to use the computers, I would put under that training.
Rather than, it's training rather than programming.
Yeah, because it's not really, it's not like, entertainment like so many of the programs are. So if you are training people how to use the computers
Okay,
and software in the computers, I would put those in the formal training sessions.
okay, but if we had a similar class on how to use Libby, where you show them how to use Libby on the computer.
If it's a class with an
Yeah.
instructor, that it counts in the formal training sessions.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if it's going to change your numbers a great deal, again, you're probably
Make a
shifting
note.
it.
Yeah. Yes, I will make
Yeah,
a
just
note.
leave a
Thank
note.
you. Thank you.
If we just have a gravel parking lot and there's no designated spots at all, what do we enter? If it is your library's lot and nobody else shares it, I would just do how many cars you could fit if it's full.
Agreed.
Eileen, please circle back from Eileen to patrons and notes on that. I will do that in a second. And then Mary Rose is right. Okay, are there any other questions on the form before I go to our website?
I'm going to frame that. Mary Rose is right.
We can give you
For everything. For everything.
All right, and then circulation. I'm trying to remember where I found this. I was looking for it the other day. I'm gonna go search for it. So the first question is, how many people have library cards from that library? And then the second question is, of that group, how many of them live in that town? So you would do, no, not here. Not here.
Can I make a suggestion that, Eileen, if you have a few moments, if you could stay after school?
Yeah,
and
that'll
have
work.
this conversation, because this is more in terms of how the networks are going to provide the numbers to their people as opposed to how the people are filling it in.
Yeah, thanks, Mary Rose. Good suggestion. Okay, so back to the website. I just want to show you a couple of other things. So during the training, so these are the links you need. I mentioned that you can figure out what your award was. We don't send notices to individual libraries. We send overall notices, and you can always find your awards and past awards on this page of our website. And so you can get initial payments, and I'll go over when you get that first award in a minute, but we can't get them all done in one swoop. So we have to separate. So the first couple of months, you're separated into groups. Then the second payment is in, it was in April this year, early April. So you can get a picture of that. And then there's a sheet that shows the total awards. So these are all what everyone got. And it's listed by municipality, your population, the day your library was certified. And then your grant is separated into 3 categories. And so one of them is the NRC, that's that non-resident circulation offset. And you can see that for some, even our smallest libraries, you're getting $600 here. Some of you are getting $16,000 here. 30,000. Boston obviously has got a lot of people from out of town. $1,500 depending on how many people. So it's not a small amount. Excuse me. And the reason we need this number is because we get a pool of money and we have to break it out. And one of the categories is this. And so if any of you doesn't submit this information, we'll wait until we get it for as long as we can, but we do need to separate that out. So if we can't get this information from you, you won't get that offset. So that's one category. And then the LIG is, this is a grant that is based on strictly your population size. So if you are a larger city, you're going to get more of that, larger share of that. And then there's the municipal equalization grant. And so that is based essentially on how wealthy your town is. So if your town is wealthy, you're not going to get as much of a share of that as the towns that are less wealthy. So, and then those 3 get added together, and here's your total award. And you get half when you're certified, and that's going to be either in November, December, or January. And then you get the other half in April, basically, because we don't get the full amount from the state. So there's no way we can give the full amount at certification. And then something I learned taking this position is that if you want your money first, or if you are competitive, the libraries who get both of their forms in early and that are accurate, and we don't have to go back and we don't have to fix any problems or reach back out to you, you go in the first group because you're the easiest. We literally go through and match and say, okay, this is done, this is done, this is done. On the financial form, this is done, this is done, this is done. If we have to do any math, if we have to search through 8 pages of a document, if we have to do anything, you get moved to the bottom of the list. So if you are competitive or you want your money first, do your ARIS and your financial form early and make sure it's correct. The deadline is the deadline, so you can wait until the deadline, but you won't be in that first group if you wait until the last day that it's due. Also on here, you can go into the regulations and standards. So the municipal appropriation, that is the minimum amount your town or city is required to give you every year. And there's a formula here. And so it's based on the idea of a maintenance of effort. We don't want to see, the state and the commissioners don't want to see library budgets just being cut because. And so there is a small increase over 3 years. So you take your average of 3 years and multiply it by 1.025, which is the math for 2.5%. So, and then the other requirements, you have to be open to everyone in the Commonwealth. You can't charge for normal services. You have to have if you are over 10,000 people, your library director has to have an MLS. If you're under 10,000 people, the rules are different. I'm not going to go into too many detail because we will be posting, we did an overview of this stuff and we'll put that online. You have to spend a certain percentage of your budget on materials. And so I'm going to pop this up. This is based on population size. So if you have 10,000 people, you have to spend 16% of your municipal appropriation or your total appropriation from your municipality on materials. The money doesn't have to come from your town budget. So you can use friends, you can use state aid money, you can use grants to meet this requirement, but it is based on what your municipality gives you. And then you are also required to be open a number of hours per week based on your population size. So for this example, if you are required to be, if you have 10,000 to 14,999, you're required to be open 40 hours a week, 5 days a week, including some evening hours. The next bigger tiers have to also be open 6 days a week, so one of the weekend days. If you are in one of these lower tiers and you are open the higher number of hours of a different tier, you can reduce your spending on materials by that amount of that. So if you were open, so let's work with the same group. You're required to be open 40, but you're open 63. You can go ahead and reduce your materials expenditure to that tier. So you can go from 16% to 12%, and that can make a really big difference for you. There's no penalty for doing that. Nobody looks bad at you for that. And if you do that, you have to fill out a form called the notification of request for flexibility. So this is the flexibility process. And it's just a document. It does need to be signed by the library director and your trustee chair. You have to do some math for us here, saying that you meet the next tier's requirements. You'll note we haven't updated this yet, so that'd be good to note, Weichi, so we can do that. And you do have to apply for this every year, or ask for this every year, but it's in statute, so it's not going to go away, and it doesn't look bad on you if you do that. Then you have to lend books and materials to other libraries. You have to do your state aid application and your ARIS report, and then your ARIS survey, and you also have to do that non-resident requirement reporting. And then if you can't meet either the hours or the materials, you can still be certified, but you do get a reduced award. And that's only if you can get to 90%. So if you are meeting less than 90% of either of these two categories, you're not going to get state aid for that category. You're not going to get state aid. If you can meet 90% of that percentage or of those hours, you'll get a reduced amount. So it's 12.5% of the award will be cut if you can't meet your hours at 90% and you can't meet your materials. So if you can't meet either of them, you'll lose 25% of your state aid award. And let's see, if you can't meet your municipal appropriation requirement, you can apply for a waiver of that requirement, and that requires additional training, additional paperwork, and you have to have a plan for getting off of that waiver. If you think that might be you, reach out to me and Mary Rose so that we can, help you figure out what forms and stuff you need to do. Then our calendar is here. So this gives you your deadlines. Again, the ARIS closes on August 18th, which is a little earlier. Your financial form opens on August 7th. So there is 2 weeks of overlap there. So just be aware of that. And then October 6th is when your financial report is due. And then we have a very, very quick turnaround to get the first group of libraries certified at that commissioners meeting. So that's why it's really important to be accurate and 100% complete and meet all of those requirements. Frequently asked questions, there's stuff here. And then the library statistics are what we post online. This is the information. A lot of people who are not librarians, we get a lot of questions from municipalities, reporters look at this. So this information is available online. It does take a while to get it into form and to make sure that it's been answered, the questions are answered correctly and all of that kind of stuff. So last year's are up to date. The salaries page, if you're looking for salaries information, remember that's a snapshot of FY23, so that should be the most current salaries information. So I'm going to pause and see if there are any other questions. We are just a couple minutes late. Home library codes, not barcodes. Yes, I can say after. Yeah, and the networks need time, as the network admin over there is reminding everybody. Is there a tool on the site that can be used to estimate the state aid we would be getting, provided everything works out to plan? There really isn't, because we don't actually know what we're going to have until it's been appropriated. So I don't.
If I can weigh in. So the awards are based on the appropriation that we get from for state aid in the budget. And we provide the Department of Revenue at each iteration of the budget. So the governor, the House, the Senate, and at the when we finally get a report from the group meeting currently to hammer out the differences between the House and the Senate. And then the final budget, it's called a cherry sheet estimate. So we send that number to the Department of Revenue and they include it in the receipts that the information, there's a cherry sheet, and you can go to the Department of Revenue Division of Local Services and you will see. It's an estimate. It doesn't include the non-resident circ, obviously, but it gives you an idea of what, if we get $17.6 million, what you would receive next year from the Senate budget, which is at $17.6 million. So we don't provide it on our website, but the DOR does on the Division of Local Services under the cherry sheet estimates.
All right. Yeah. And somebody asked about the financial report. So it's on the calendar page, August 7th. I do have a hard stop today. So Mary Rose, can you talk with Eileen at the end of this? I kind of forgot I have a doctor's appointment at 1. So if there, Mary Rose, the appropriation sheets. So I'm just going to pause for any last questions. Thank you for coming. I'm going to stop the sharing and I'm going to stop recording. If I can figure out how to do that.